All right. And I'm not going to do any introductions because we don't know if we're going to do anything with this. And
right.
we've already talked before and put one up. And I thought that video was actually quite well received. It got for my videos, it got especially at that time, it got quite a bit of traffic. And it's interesting because a lot of people, this space right now, you know, so the Rebel Wisdom guys were in on Sunday, and so Alexander, one of the two guys, you know, he's a meditation teacher, and so there's just a lot of people in this space, and Peterson has Christianity was kind of looked at before as, you know, we don't want that. I've got a fair number of friends who are, lack of a better word, into new agey things. And one of my friends had a big birthday party, and there was a musician there, and she was singing songs from Hinduism, songs from Buddhism, songs from American music. And then there was a Christian folk song. But before she sang that, she felt the need to give a whole series of disclaimers.
Right. You know,
and I thought, well, that's telling. Apparently, the songs from all the other cultures and religions didn't need exclaimers, but the Christian song, that needed exclaimers. So you can take that a lot of different ways.
I couldn't help but have the vision of, I feel like meatloaf used to be something that families would look forward to and enjoy. But nowadays, you know, if you make meatloaf and you bring it out, you say, oh, sorry, everyone. Like, I didn't have time. I just made this meatloaf. And it's almost like that, like as time goes by. Yeah.
Now, in your email, you said you asked some very interesting questions about, and I could pull it up, but you probably remember, then that video that you sent to me, that was very interesting. So you're really challenging me in some interesting ways. So what, if you can remind me, what were you thinking about in terms of that email and wanting to do in terms of this conversation?
I guess one of the things that's really jumped out at me in what you've been sharing is this, you're pulling together these threads in a way that really communicated to me about how kind of we're all religious and we can never get away from that. And talking about how, you know, just because we gave up the church doesn't mean that we're now free of religion. You know, where have we snuck it in the back door? And what are the institutions that we essentially worship in and essentially put at the top of these hierarchies? And, you know, I've heard you use this phrase that, like, for you, one of the things you see is that what's happening in the culture right now is a civil war within Christendom. And I think that was a helpful way to frame things. And since I'm in some ways like prototypical of just everyone going through this, you know, like I was not raised in a religious household. Now I'm into Buddhism, and I'm trying to take it very seriously, like from a religious perspective. I don't want to be spiritual, not religious. I want to be religious, and I'm not sure about the spiritual.
Well, say more about that, because again, I mean, I hear a lot of spiritual but not religious. Why?
Yeah.
Why do you frame it that way?
I think it's basically because I engaged in this long-term project of having an organic farm. And after 10 years of doing, and for many reasons, like I thought that this was a way that I could embody being the change I want to see in the world, right? Like if I started an organic farm, I would be truly taking on the mission of making the world a better place. And not just in some philosophical abstract way, but like in a very embodied way that wasn't just me acting it out, but it was also impacting my environment and people. And, and I didn't just farm organically. I also like joined like local food advocacy groups and was like politically active in pushing a sort of local food agenda and an organic kind of policy agenda and stuff. So I'm very committed to that project. But at the end, at 10 years in, it was basically, it led me to a place of like depression and, thoughts of suicide all the time and like a really dark place. So I had pursued this beautiful vision and it had led me to like almost literal dead end. And so then that left me with this really difficult question, which was, or realization, which is that, you know what, actually, I don't know what's best for me. I did everything that I thought was best. Like, you know, reasonably intelligent. I could sort of add up everything that was good in this formula, and I cooked the recipe, and I cooked it for 10 years, but it didn't actually nourish me. It didn't give me, that's something, that's kind of a metaphor my teacher uses quite a bit, is this idea of like a recipe, and does it give you nourishment or not? And it didn't. And so, yeah, I was left with this question, like, well, how do I know what's best for me? Which kind of led me to the question of like, well, how do I know anything? How can I be, if I don't know how to take care of myself, then how can I really be sure of anything?
Yeah.
So that led me to really asking these questions. And I guess I was attracted to Buddhism for various reasons. And a lot of it probably had to do with the idea that like, oh, well, it's not Christianity. I didn't even look there, right? So actually, I'm really thankful for Peterson and for you, because now I can look there. So yeah, so then I just thought, well, I don't know what's best for me. So where's a tradition or something that I can kind of put myself in, kind of like a structure to help guide me, because I kind of lost the plot, right? I kind of took my story to the end of the story, and then I got to the end of the story, and now I'm just in this place where there's no stories, and I don't know what the hell's going on. So I could have just turned to like a spirituality, and like maybe I could have just got hooked onto the next thing, and maybe in 10 years I'll say, oh, well, I tried the Buddhist thing, and, you know, it didn't work, and who knows. But I'm rambling now, but I think you get the idea.
No, it's that question of, it's a really interesting thing, because I hear this all the time from people, you know, people trying Christianity, or people trying this or trying that. And we have these phrases like, it didn't work. And we have an intuitive sense of, it didn't work. I mean, it's the best way to say it. We don't have any other words that we use for it. But then it leads us on to something else. And I love how you put that into story, because again, one of the things before this whole Jordan Peterson thing about 5-6 years ago, I was getting, every now and then I flirt with the idea of writing a book. And what I really wanted to write the book about was story, in terms of, I was trying to figure out in a Christian frame of reference, what on earth are we? You know, so I'm this material being, but now I'm about to turn 55. And, you know, but so all the cells are different. I'm living in California. I grew up in New Jersey. I spent years in the Dominican Republic, years in Michigan. I've had different perspectives on the world. You know, I used to be within my mother's womb, and then I was a helpless baby, and then I was a toddler, and then I was a boy, and then I was a teenager, and then I was a young man, and now I'm a middle-aged man, and someday I'll be an old man, and then I'll die. And so then we have this question in Christianity of resurrection, where, okay, resurrection, great. So, but what exactly will be raised? I mean, what is the me that God will somehow miraculously reconstitute? And in what way is that me, and what way is that not me? And so I just then I had to ask the question, well, how can I know me? What is me? And I think, well, I have an experience of me, but if you ask the 30-year-old Paul Vanderklay, and the 16-year-old Paul Vanderklay, and the 4-year-old, and now the 55-year-old, okay, which one is the true me? Okay. And then, I mean, it just gets hopelessly complicated. Then my wife knows a me I don't know, and I know a me she doesn't know, and my kids and you. And so, and the best way I could, and again, I kind of got to the point of saying, you need God. Okay, even let's leave ontology alone. You need God even to have me, because I would need a being that could, without bias, perfectly see through every single layer to actually just know me and actually be able to do something with me. And so the best I could work it down to was, what am I functionally? I'm a story, and I'm what the story nested within stories. And so for example, I had a good friend in church that died a number of years ago. He was an anthropologist at training from UC Berkeley. He was an alcoholic, drank himself nearly to death, got into the program, got sober, and then worked the program for, a number of years. And then, was doing everything this guy did. He was a typical alcoholic. Everything he did to excess, including AA. But he got to the end of it and he's like, what else? So then he would join the church. And so, that brings me to Augustine. Nothing can satisfy one who would not be satisfied with God. And it's the sense that God for Augustine is this force of gravity that pulls us to himself, because that's how we were made. And so your story just resonates with me about many other people that I've heard. They do. I'm going to save, my father, started out as ministry to save Peterson, New Jersey, and I'm going to save this and I'm going to do that. And then at some point say, it's Jordan Peterson. Well, what does it mean? I can't live without meaning. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating. So this idea of the civil war of Christendom for me is, so one of the conversations I had with the Rebel Wisdom guys was the idea that, and Peterson brings this up in one of his videos, to kind of take Buddhism here, you divorce it from its roots. And so one of the people at our meetup is from the Middle East, and he's trying to get his head around, obviously Islam, the context in which he grew up, but then now he's in this context. And so he's kind of an atheist, and he wants to have a God, but he doesn't know how to choose one. And I heard that and I thought, you would never ask that question 600 years ago.
Right.
And so it's this, okay, so here we are.
But maybe 2,000 years ago? Would you is this what you're talking about when we're moving into a new kind of pantheism? Because, nowadays it's almost as if okay, well, who am I going to pick? Yeah. It's almost like there is a pantheism, even though they're discrete, in my understanding of the pantheon, the gods kind of all orbit around. You
mean pantheism or polytheism?
Polytheism, sorry.
Okay.
Polytheism. Yeah. But anyways, go on.
No, that's right. Well, 600 years. So Charles Taylor, the great Canadian philosopher, there's probably been a few, in his book, The Secular Age, said, the whole question of the book is why was God axiomatic 500 years ago and he isn't today? What happened among us? And so his huge book is an attempt to answer that question. So, but to pose the question, well, it was so interesting when he posed the question, because he posed it in two ways. One way was, if I need to understand the practices of what it means to be a Christian. And I thought, you did grow up as a Muslim, because that orientation, you've got the 5 pillars of Islam. But at the same time, so you've got that, and then you've got the consumer piece where, okay, I'm going to choose. It's I'm not sure if I want to breathe air today. I think I'm going to, what do you mean you're not going to breathe air? It's, you don't have a choice about this.
Yeah.
Yet,
well, kind of makes me think about how, in some ways, the way I think of my relationship to Buddhism is, in some way, it's like a marriage. The way I want to approach it is as if I'm in a marriage, in that I don't anticipate a divorce. And it's I made my decision, and even though I might get bored in 5 years, or I might not like it in 10 years or 6 months, it's kind of I've come to understand that I'm not my own best compass, and that whatever I happen to be feeling in a particular moment isn't necessarily what's true. And that it's kind of like, I have to have I need the structure of this relationship, just like I need the structure of my marriage to help me cope with the kind of the craziness of just being a person. I mean, we're all kind of schizophrenic, and we're all hypocrites. And when you enter into religion, or you enter into like a marriage, you realize how much of a hypocrite you are. And and it's always easy for people to see the hypocrisy of those who stand for something, because it's just so obvious. But just because you don't stand for something doesn't mean you're not a hypocrite. It just means it's not so obvious. And that makes me think about, just to reflect on how I've been approaching this thing, and why I say I appreciate religion more than I appreciate spirituality. Because to me, religion is like this recognition of human nature, that like we are this way. We are just constantly being tossed back and forth by our desires and by circumstances. And unless we have something to hold on to, you can't really say that you're living your life. I think the best you can say is that your life is kind of living you, or that circumstances are running the show. And that becomes very clear during meditation. And that becomes very clear, having had the experience that I had of doing everything I thought was right and then still having it all fall apart. And I don't think it's not that like when I'm in this relationship with a religion that things aren't going to fall apart. Of course they are. But it's like, this is the best I can do. What else can I do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I think you said it very well. And it's convenient. Having a religion means never having to say you're a hypocrite, because you can always change the standard. Because you can say, well, yesterday I thought that this was right, and today I think that this is right. And if there's no objective standard, we have this fun family story where we were in a Jack in the Box restaurant, which is a fast food restaurant. And along the door is this scale that basically shows height. And my dear wife says to me, wasn't that nice? Children can measure themselves. I said, honey, that's to catch the thieves so they know how tall they are. But if you don't have anything out there, how can you know? I mean, that's the whole problem of reference. How can I know me unless there is a static not me that is enduring?
Well, I think that when I listen to you, I mean, I haven't had that much engagement with Christianity until listening to you and Peterson. And, I haven't been part of this Buddhist tradition for that long, but I've been studying it, and I hear lots of commonality. And like in Buddhism, and I think generally more in Eastern philosophy and religion, there's this idea of non-duality, and like duality and non-duality, which is different than the sort of mind-body duality or the soul-body duality of the West. Non-duality is sort of like just recognizing that, there's no up without a down. Like the things always exist in this conceptual framework, and in the conceptual framework, or you could say the storyverse, only exists in a situation of relativism, like, me, you, right? Like there's a self, there's only a self because there's an other, there's only an object because there's a subject. And for the subject to exist, the subject implies another to create the subject. And I think it's an interesting actually area to explore maybe between us, that there's a departure in Buddhism which takes a non-personal approach to what creates the self, or what gives rise to the self, is a non-personal concept or force. And then in Christianity, it's a personal it's personified. God is a personified thing. And I wonder if that has more to do with just like a different metaphoric story that we're wrapping the same fundamental truth in, or if the stories, or if that's not the case, like we're actually pointing to different fundamental truths.
My knowledge, I've basically got an academic knowledge of Buddhism, of Hinduism, of other religions of that.
Well, that's good. I have a non-academic perspective on everything, so
so it's good for us to talk, because
yeah.
and when I look at it, so I can understand the Buddhist practice of, in a disciplined way, experiencing the and correct my language if I get it wrong here, the extinguishing of the self, which is in a sense one of the goals of meditation is to see without the self, and to realize that the difference between you and me, the difference between me and this table, that this difference is illusory, that all of this, in a sense, that this difference is illusory, because the assertion is that the truest, final, fullest sense is non-duality, non-differentiation, and that this is, in a sense, the great sea of being, as it's sometimes called. There's some really interesting ways in which some of this stuff come together. For example, I was just listening to the Sam Harris-Ben Shapiro conversation, and just at the end of it, Sam Harris basically articulates precisely what I've called the monarchical vision, which is, in a strange way, a vision of the world without a self, because it understands that if I see the world from a perspective, that perspective governs what I see. It can't help but do so. So this monarchical vision, this idea that I can see objects purely and fully, is in a strange way a vision without a self, which I think is interesting connection to this long tradition that says, the goal of this is to now see the world without a self, because once you have a self, now that shapes the world that you see. And we know that biologically, we know that psychologically, we know that philosophically, and maybe even physics says that. So, and so then the questions that I have about Buddhism are, okay, so then what is your end state? And from an academic view of Buddhism, what I've read, Houston Smith, World Religions, which I think is quite a good textbook on world religions. The end state is then the dissolution of myself into the great sea of being. Whereas that's a fundamentally opposite picture from, say, Christianity, where the end state is the perfection of myself and the continuity of my story as an individual within a community of persons. And part of that reflects, one of the things that differentiates Christianity from Islam and Judaism is, of course, the Trinity, because Christianity says that God himself is a community. And that Christians have been blowing their minds about that question for a long, long time. And it never would have started, and it never would have differentiated from polytheism if it hadn't gone through the crucible of the exile, and basically polytheism getting wrung out of the Jewish people. And then Jesus comes along in the New Testament, and they're at they're at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, they're worshiping Jesus. And anybody who knows their Old Testament should say, should you be doing this? So it's very interesting the way when you begin to take these different systems and start comparing things in them, what are the differences and where they seem to kind of at least have some alignment or resemblances.
Yeah, and I guess I thought about a lot of things when you're talking, but the thing that just comes up at the end here is it seems like one of the projects that comes out of the Peterson discussion is basically how do we all get along and still maintain our identities, like, and so it like not even talking about ethnic identities, but let's say we're talking about religious identities. What truths, what things can we agree upon so that we can actually tolerate each other? We obviously have to agree. We have to have certain things that we can agree on and embrace each other so that we can actually then tolerate our differences. If we don't have those, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but if we don't have those like monarchical similarities, like the things at the top of the hierarchy that we can come together on, then we're kind of, sorry, but the dream of like a diverse multicultural society is just not going to run. You're just going to be against each other because the only thing there's going to be is differences. So I do think it's important to the broader project to be talking about these religious similarities and differences. Anyways, that's just.
No, I think that's right. Because, I hear sometimes people say, well, we want diversity. Okay. But just like you say, you cannot maintain diversity with some unities underneath and some agreements underneath. Agreements such as you and I can have differences of perspective, differences of opinion, but we're going to have to agree on some things so that we can disagree on other things. For example, and this is in some ways where this is why the conversations about diversity in politics get so heated, because politics is a very pragmatic level where it says, okay, these are the boundaries of my farm. Mm-hmm. And someone comes to you and says, well, you, me, we're the same. So our farms are the same. So if I'm hungry, I'm going to wander into your fields and start picking your vegetables. And if I need a little extra cash, I'm going to start selling them too. And whereas you might say, if you're hungry, I don't want you to go hungry. I'm happy to share food with you, but I draw the line when you start picking my vegetables and setting up a stand right at the edge of my farm, and you keep the money. So there's these levels of differences, levels of agreement, and then obviously the quest is to figure this out, and it's a very difficult thing because
the ground's always shifting.
Yes.
Right.
And so someone could rightly say to me, and maybe some people will in the comment section, because the comment section is a cornucopia of ideas and opinions. But someone could say, Paul, you shouldn't be talking to a Buddhist this way. What your goal should be, and then they have an idea about what evangelism looks like and conversion looks like, and so oh, okay, well. But let's imagine that kind of conversation isn't, in fact, even instrumental towards your outcome. So are you invested in the outcome, or are you invested in the conversation? And then you go all the way to Islam, when, let's say, the Taliban dynamited those huge Buddhas along the Silk Road. These things must not stand. But there are things in our culture that we say they must not stand. And in fact, part of what's happening in the United States right now is a testing of those limits on both sides. Can we have a president that his relationship with what has commonly been understood as the truth is nearly non-existent? Mm-hmm. Or, oh no, it's a higher truth. Oh wow, now I'm used to having those kind of conversations, but in other areas, and so you've got the right and the left, and they're just pulling away, and so they have questions about structure, and you say, okay, well, I've lived diversity all my life, but the kinds of diversity that I've lived have tended to be nested within, let's say, a Christian frame. So what we don't share is skin color or maybe upbringing. What we do share is Jesus. Well, okay, that's an easy thing to say, but now what songs are we going to sing? Are we going to sing Negro spirituals? Are we going to sing Dutch songs? Are we going to sing hymns that came out of England? Are we going to sing what CCLI puts on? So now suddenly we're going to talk about practice. And this is very hard. And I think, the whole conversation about the intellectual dark web. So you've got Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro sitting and talking to each other. Shapiro, obviously an observant Jew. Sam Harris saying things like, religion is the
worst thing ever.
The worst thing ever. But you can talk to Ben and you can agree with Ben on things. So then you say, well, this is improvement, okay? So let's at least start by not killing each other. And maybe we're going to have some rules about property because, but this is, and again, all of this, none of this pops out of the air from nothingness. All of this is nested within a story. And so by the time you get to where we are in our respective countries, we are leveraging in ways that we cannot fully appreciate so much that is beneath us, which is, I think, what Peterson is trying to say to Sam Harris, that you can't, you just try and make a human being. It isn't going to happen.
Well, it makes me think about the idea that you brought up before, like a clean room. Like, where's Sam Harris's clean room, right? Where he's going to find the space for morality, like his naturalistic morality to arise from. That's actually not just the fumes of Christian morality. And I mean, I'm not sure, this is an idea that I'm not too sure about, but I wonder if that the idea of meditation and mindfulness as a sort of pragmatic activity is getting close to that clean room. It turns out that the activity of just sitting still and being silent and just becoming aware of the internal circus of your own body shows you how crazy you are. Right? And you can't deny it. Like, someone, your mother can tell you you're crazy and you can say, oh no, like you're just what do you know? You're not me. But when it's you sitting down with yourself, it's not a clean room, but what it does do is it shows you that there is no clean room and that you can't pretend that there is one, and that direct revelation, like that direct insight is it's very powerful. Because I think one of the things, I think there's a reason why meditation and mindfulness are becoming so popular, and I don't think it's just because of the therapy. Like, it's because I do think that there's a deeper, like, you say our watchers are always watching, and that there's these broader things moving through society. And I think just like Peterson lighting the conversation on fire, I mean, that didn't just happen for 1, 2, or 3 reasons. It happened for all these crazy deep reasons that are very hard to track, historical and otherwise. And I think that the mindfulness discussion, or part of what's going on, of course it has all these sort of silly or soft edges, I could say, that's sort of like spiritual, people just finding a different way to have their best life now kind of thing. But there's also, for me, one of the things that's so appealing about it is because I didn't come from a tradition, it's kind of like, well, where's the ground zero? Like, where do I start? Where's the basis? Where's the solid ground for answering that question that I posed at the beginning, which is, how do I know what's best for me? Which then leads to the question, well, how do I know anything? And how do you even grapple with that? It seems to me that the Western tradition of philosophy doesn't answer those questions, because it's basically just like, this person argues this, and then this person argues this, and then this person argues this, and then it's just this long conversation. And I guess people engage in that conversation by reading. So they read these philosophers and they sort of read philosopher A, and then they read and they're convinced. Then they read philosopher B, and then they're convinced. Then they read philosopher C, and they're convinced. And then they read philosopher D, and they're convinced. And by the time they get to philosopher E, they're like, wait a minute, like, what's going on here? Why am I, like, whoever I read, I think they're right. But person A, B, C, and D all had different things to say. So who's correct here? And it kind of leads to doubt. So it seems to me that like part of the Western methodology to train the mind is to read people so that you can basically undermine your own ability to decide what's true, because you start to realize that actually it's not so clear what's true and what's not true, because smart people have had different things to say throughout history. And so anyways, that's just my observation about how I think the Western tradition has developed a means to train people to see the limits of their minds and their kind of crazy natures of just following whatever ideas put in front of them. Whereas the mindfulness and meditation technique, it's based on directly observing your own mind, which is a very different pathway towards a similar goal, I think. And I think that part of the mindfulness movement is about helping people directly confront. And when I mean directly, what I mean to say is that like when you put your hand in a fire, you don't argue with that. Like you have a direct experience of heat. Right. Or when you drink a glass of water, you have a direct experience of water. There's no abstraction there. Right. And so when we sit in mindfulness or stand or walk or whatever, it's like you're getting as close to just basic information, basic life information, or sense data, I've heard some people call it. And that might be one place where we can choose to sort of set a ground and say like, okay, well, this is as far back as I can go in discovering what's creating this story. I know that it's getting a bit, I'm mixing things up a little bit, but maybe I'll just stop talking for now.
Oh, I thought that was helpful. I thought that was, it reminds me of, in the videos I did about 3-4 months ago when I was going through the history of the Reformation, when in Europe, the religious, what was seen as the religious uniformity that was understood beneath the institutional umbrella of the Roman Catholic Church broke down. That led to the wars of the Reformation, that led to a quest for certainty. So what happened at the end of the Middle Ages, suddenly because of the Crusades, because of the trade that the Italian merchants were doing, suddenly better texts were coming into Europe. Better texts spawned an examination of the accepted texts, such as Jerome's Vulgate. Erasmus, who remained a Roman Catholic, set the Vulgate next to better Greek texts and said, there are differences here.
Can I interrupt with a question?
Go ahead.
So the text came in, but was there also dissatisfaction in general with the way things were going? I wonder if, because it seems to me that if the society was stable and the majority of people's needs were being met, that even if a new book showed up, no one would really care except for some scholars. But it's this combination of like instability plus the new text that's the fertile ground. And it made me think back to what we were saying before, like, it's not working for me. So there has to be this, like, it's not working for me. And then you look to this new thing. There's no need for a revolution unless things aren't working.
That's right. And there were many layers of change going on in Europe at the time. And you're exactly right. And one of the big motivations of the Reformation, which also motivated the Council of Trent, which was the Counter-Reformation, was clergy corruption. So again, you had a two-speed religion, and you have a hierarchy, and who's supposed to be at the top of the hierarchy? Well, the Pope. Well, read any history of the papacy in late medieval Europe. You know, the offices are being bought and sold. Everybody understands that the entire thing is corrupt. And so Martin Luther comes in, and they need the one true thing, which for Luther is the Word of God. Okay? So with reason and the Bible, we can have truth. Well, what happened was even Luther and some of his close friends like Karlstadt, they had reason in the Bible, and they still had multiple truths. And so then you have these wars of Europe, and then then the question is, how can we stop killing each other? How can we know the truth? And I think, your journey in terms of, okay, this philosopher says this philosopher says that, I need a place to begin. And so so then it also reminds me, Roger, yesterday, he's an Eastern Orthodox blogger who blogs on, he's a pretty popular blogger, did a little book summary of the last pagan generation in the Roman Empire. And I know some of this history from other of my reading. By about the time of Anselm and Augustine, there's the elites of the Roman Empire who are now the last pagan generation, the first Christian generations. There's this, the new wave that all the kids were doing was celibacy. And you hear that and you say, what? But it shows how much how powerful status can be, because all the really hot chicks were sleeping with no one. And so all the really high status guys were also sleeping with no one. And so they all, the ones with the highest status were giving up their, it's almost the story of the Buddha. They were giving up their power and their status, and they were going out into the desert to meditate. And of course, this was Christian asceticism. And so they lived lives, and then you have the monastic movement starts. And it's interesting, this almost cyclical pattern of success, corruption, turning the soil over. And those who are offered everything the world has to give, see the emptiness of it, and then, live in a hut in the desert, barely eating enough to survive, pursuing this vision of, the beatific vision.
Right.
And so and what we've seen on a massive scale that the world hasn't seen, and a huge number of people arriving at this point where what to eat, my grandparents struggling through the Depression, what to eat. The question was, is there enough edible things I can get in my mouth to turn the hunger off?
Right.
Now, what to eat? Everything. So what do I need to do? I don't think it's any mystery. Let's see if I have Karen. Yeah, I have Karen Armstrong's, read this book a number of years, her Karen Armstrong's Story of the Buddha. This guy lives in a palace. He has, children, a wife, if not wives. And it's an archetypal story in that his father doesn't let him see any pain and suffering. And of course, then the gods come and, we're gonna do a number on this fella. And then of course he goes down the path, and that story goes where it goes. So it's very interesting listening to you talk about your journey in terms of, okay, I've read all this philosophy. How am I supposed to know? Fascinating.
Right. Yeah.
Have you read, because you know who Yuval Harari is? I've mentioned him in a number of videos.
Yeah. I haven't read his books, but I've seen a few interviews and things.
Yeah. It's very interesting because he is a materialist. He is an atheist. He practices meditation in order to strip story away from everything, so that his process that he says he does this in order to see clearly. And when I listen to that, it's very interesting hearing that and comparing it, let's say, what I know classically of Buddhism and that entire movement. And so then I have the similar things when I listen to Sam Harris, and I think, okay, you're a materialist. You say the experiences of your brain are dependent on the physical processes that are doing them. And that's in a clean room for you, Sam. And so how, again, does consciousness integrate into the material world?
Right.
And so all these same questions keep coming up again and again.
And I think, like, for me, one of the missing pieces that I don't hear them talking about is, because there's this rejection of the past, of like religion and the wisdom of our ancestors and, you know, these millennia long traditions that have worked for human beings. There's a rejection of that. I think that Yuval Harari it's a very good idea to return daily to this clean room, you know, to this story-free existence. But, you know, that story-free, like, he still has a body, he still has a partner, and so there's always it's hard to talk about in simple language without being wrong, like without, I knew I'd get in trouble, but basically to say, you know, there's both the transcendent and the immediate, and they both, like, they're just always there mixing together, right?
Yes.
The immanent and the transcendent.
Yeah.
And I think generally it seems like people actually want to separate them. Like, the modern thing is like, okay, I want my clean room and I want my material existence, and I do the clean room so I can have a better material existence, and but these two things don't meet. And I think what I hear from my own perspective is that they're not willing to actually limit their desires, and that's part of what a religion is for. It's to help you structure your crazy, wild, desire-fueled mind so that you can go to that clean room, but then, like, go to that sort of experience, that transcendent experience of no story, but then you have to pee. So then the story comes back in because you have a body. So as long as we have these bodies, and as long as we have to eat food and we have to care for our loved ones, and there's a story. So, like, we can't be free of stories, but we can be free from the stories, in that, like, we can never escape the stories, but we can see them for what they are. And so that maybe we don't have to kill other people because they have a different story, because we see, oh, you have a story and I have a story, and my story is in conflict with your story, but is it worth killing ourselves over our stories? I don't know if we can get better than that. Like, is that where we sort of hit the limits of what we can hold as these limited embodied beings? And I think that if, like, for me, going into that, well, I think I wrote it to you in my email a little bit, and I thought it was really interesting that there's a Buddhist scholar and teacher and practitioner named Ken MacLeod. He offered this simple idea about the Buddhist religion, that there's like these three parts. There's the therapeutic aspect, you know, where you would meditate or you would go to Buddhist practice to make your life better. You know, whether you're a business person or whether you're a mom, or it doesn't matter why. You want to reduce your stress or something. And then there's the community aspect, where you want to be around other people that share your beliefs, and that you have this desire for communal existence and friendship. And then there's this other aspect of it, which is the sort of mystical or transcendent aspect of it, you know, for the people who want to know, well, what's really true? You know, what's really real? Like, what's going on? And that these three aspects work together, and the transcendent kind of always is a buffer or a restorative for the other two, because the therapeutic and the communal, they encourage institutionalization. Like, they're where the practices happen. So people are making decisions And the decisions that worked 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 years ago, they have all of this veneration because of their long-lived usefulness. But it may be that in 300 years, the conditions have changed and that those practices actually aren't useful. And this mystical or transcendent side of things provides this external, not external, but this other source, this other level of knowing to come and criticize the traditions that can say, well, sorry, like you're off base here. It's no longer in line with the higher level of realizations. And I wonder if part of what's happening with the sort of mushy middle of spirituality but no religion is that they're having these transcendent or mystical experiences, but since they've rejected the other two aspects, the sort of the language of traditional religion and the practices of traditional religion, they just have this amorphous experience. It's like going on a drug trip and you have all of these amazing visions and then you come back and all you have is like a little journal entry to show, right?
Yeah.
Like and you can't translate it into your life. Like maybe you get to quit smoking and that's great, as Peterson says, but like, can we do more with this? Like this is kind of the gas that's powered religion for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think for Sam Harris and maybe Harari, by rejecting and letting go of the religious structures, they've taken this incredible source of meaning that transcends the merely human, and they've basically made it impotent because there's no story to hang this inside of. Like you want to take this stuff that's beyond language, beyond story, but then paradoxically channel it into story so that we can make use of it in our lives and be better husbands and better, wives, and we do have less stress and deal with the difficulties. So that's kind of what
I think it's really helpful. And as you were talking, I was thinking the thing that I've been thinking about a lot for the last few weeks is how to talk about reality, how to talk about the plural, and we don't have the right word for it. We C.S. Lewis talks well about this. We always have to take words out of our concrete world in order to talk about them. And so that's why we use metaphor. But layers isn't the right word because layers tend to stay distinct because it is all, it's much more, if I dig in my backyard, there's rocks, there's roots, there's animals there. I mean, it's just all in there.
Yeah.
And so you've got the transcendent aspect. You've got the physical aspect. Even when we say, we shouldn't kill, that in a sense is the idea behind the American experiment, that we're not going to kill over the transcendent, because Europe had been killing over, you take communion wrong, you're going to die. Now, is that the only reason? No, because we're all layered and integrated. So your friend who takes communion wrong, well, he's my friend. He's my business partner. Voltaire says, capitalism is great because Muslims, Jews, and Christians can all get along if they're making money. So all you've basically added is a fourth god. They serve the god of money that all the other three people can. And part of what's so difficult about talking about this is even just the practice of talking tries to reduce all of this incredible diversity down into one stream of language, which, incredible reduction. And so you use time to parcel it out. But so you've got all of this diversity going on, and we need to honor the physical. I like physical better than material, actually, because the world of physics, we need to honor the physical. So I'm not going to put a bullet through your heart, because that's when the physical realm is imposing itself. The social, here we have multiple persons. We have multiple centers of the universe, as Solzhenitsyn says. How can we manage this multiplicity of persons? And then there's the multiplicity within me. One of the things is you were talking about the clean room. I mean, a big part of the Jordan Peterson contribution is his asserting our clean rooms are themselves constructed. You know, I mean, we're using clean room as a metaphor for certain industrial design. Let's say they're making hard drives. Mm-hmm. One speck of dust in that sealed hard drive would ruin the drive. So they have scrubbers and all that kind of stuff. Well, the floor is made of something, and the walls are made of something, and there's motors in that scrubber. And I mean, it's this enormously complex thing. And so Peterson is saying all of this is built in from below. After one of my meetups, someone says, "Have you been watching the cat cucumber videos?" I thought, I need cat cucumber videos. If you take a cat...
You don't know about that, Paul?
I didn't know about that. I live in a religious bubble. And you slide a cucumber next to that cat just freaks the heck out. And it's like, why is that? Well, you know, now one of the ways we can, one of the stories we tell ourselves to what we think articulates this is, you know, snakes and cucumbers and, you know, cats are afraid of snakes. That's built into us. So then we have the question, okay, I am going to try to clean room myself. I can't get Stan and Barb out of me, my parents, or Grace and Hiram. And I mean, so then and that's why so often I look around, I listen to Peterson and Sam Harris, and I look at Sam Harris and say, you can't just pull God out of this, because, you know, who can, I knew my parents, I knew my parents well. I knew my grandparents a bit. I was physically present on the lap of a woman who was not even biologically my great-grandmother. She raised my grandfather when his biological mother died. That's as far back as I go. But the stuff in here and the stuff in every cell of my body, that goes way back. And we say, yeah, but that's not gonna impact your brain. Now we think differently. And so then it's like, when I think about a clean room, and maybe this is where kind of Buddhism and the Buddha's great observation matters. When I think about a clean room, all I'm left with is God.
Yeah.
Because you can't get beyond that, because I am the product of all of this, but I'm also this being who is semi-free from this clean room, at least if I resist the materialists. We are.
Yeah. Well, it's led me down some pretty, down roads that I never thought I would travel, which is roads of about afterlife, you know, like you say, you get to this clean room and you sort of hit something that seems like a bottom, but then it's like nothing makes sense anymore. At that bottom, since there's no story, let's say, of course, we can only talk about it in story terms, but to have that direct experience, it's like I thought I had questions before, like, who am I? Well, now I have questions. Now that question is this much, it's 1,000 times bigger. And, then I start to think, well, yeah, after death, I mean, before I was a materialist, so I just thought, oh, that was it, like lights out. But I can't in good conscience hold that view given the experiences that I've had. Yeah. And then, aside from that, even just pragmatically, when I hear you articulate the Christian story about maybe why you told that beautiful story in one of your videos about your friend who was raised by his mom, yeah, who sacrificed for him.
Yeah.
And, why would someone do that? Yeah. That's we consider that to be one of the most beautiful, I thought it was such a moving and beautiful story. Well, why did that touch me so much? Why is that such an inspiration?
Yeah.
Um,
Why do we, my sermon last week, women and children first. Why does Jack stay in the water and freeze to death while Rose stays on the door, and we call that beautiful?
mm-hmm.
How did that get into us? How did that sneak into our clean room?
Right.
And everyone in the internet is, no, there's room for him. No, you don't understand.
Uh-huh.
He's giving himself for her. And why is it a him and a her?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm kind of losing the plot now.
It gets weird when you get down deep in there. But no, that's right. And so I love what you said about, the afterlife, because, one of the go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you can just make the case so clearly. Like if you are, Paul Vanderklay now, who's 55, but is it the same person who was when you're 4? And then when you're gone, these videos are still going to be alive. And then when I watch the videos, I hear your voice and you exist inside my mind. So is that an afterlife? I think you could argue it totally is an afterlife. Of course it is. Yeah. Is it the way that can we then extrapolate from that to a larger religious concept of an afterlife? I think that's very reasonable to move from that story to another story.
People will often ask me, so I'm a pastor of regular people, and people love their pets. And so sometimes people's pets are put down, and these pets, I talked to one guy once, he said, yeah, my wife died a few years ago, but what really hurt was when my dog died. I just laughed. But so I'll go to people's houses, and they're going to put down their pet. And so some people say, Pastor, the pet doesn't have a soul. Okay. The pet is not an image bearer of God the way this person is. But to what degree has that pet become a part of this person's story? And therefore, in at least the Christian frame of reference, as I believe it, will via that relationship, that pet get pulled into the age to come? Well, what does that mean? Well, one of the reasons I believe so fiercely in the resurrection, there's this passage in Isaiah 60 where Israel has been dismantled by Babylon. The people are scattered all over the place. The vision of God's chosen people is a total train wreck. And Isaiah 60 has this beautiful poem of the lost children of Israel being brought back to their homeland in the arms of the kings of the nations. And when I think about how many people died to build the Great Wall? How many people died in armies around the world for the avarice of kings and emperors? How many people died small, miserable deaths that we can never know these people? There's a wonderful woman in my adult Sunday school class who was raised by her mother in the Deep South in the U.S. She was on a sharecropper's place. Her parents were probably slaves, or her grandparents. And one of the things that this woman came out of childhood from, she's now a senior citizen. Her mother would always say, "God knows. God knows the people who were buried in the Great Wall. God knows the young girls who died early, ugly deaths of brutal prostitution in corners of the world that we never know. God knows the beauty of the amazing things that have been cooked by people whose civilizations are gone. God knows." Now you might say, well, Pastor, are you saying you're a universalist? No, I don't think universalism finally works out. What I am saying is that the Christian hope of resurrection is that justice will finally be done on this earth, and justice will come to the slaves of emperors and the people who have lived short, brutal lives at the expense of others, and the cultures of this world that we will never have time enough to taste in our 80 short years. God looks at them and claims, that's mine too. And I am not going to let it die. I am going to, in fact, keep it alive, because this is why I made the world. And why I'm a Christian is that I can't resist a story that good. And people can come at me and they can say, no, you shouldn't believe that. I think you can take your should and stick it wherever you want to. I am going to believe this story until my dying day, because it's the only way I can face this world of suffering. And so people can call me irresponsible, but when I think about, because I grew up in a place like Peterson, and I grew up with people in church, and I look around at these people in church and think, these people, this world has only given them pain, and they're just going to get more until we put them in the grave.
And no one will know about it.
And no one will know about it. And if I can see this in the tiny little window that I see in the most affluent, comfortable, scalable places in human history, my gosh. So, and I think a God who made this, an anti-natalist is way at one side and say, things shouldn't exist. But I say, I believe in a God of justice that will one day, and I can't explain how he would do it, he will one day redeem all of this in such a way that we can say its glory is greater because of the suffering. And that I see built into the Christian story. That is there suffering? Yes. Can we call it evil? Yes. All of that is true. But what happens at the cross and at the resurrection is that God says, I am able to take suffering and produce greater glory than if there had been no suffering. And we see this in movies, because if you went to a movie and everything was wonderful and everyone has a perfect life, and that's 3 hours of watching privileged people enjoy themselves, we'd leave there and say, I'm never going to do that again. Well, what do we watch? Same thing that angels long to look into, because the New Testament talks about, uses this word which is almost synonymous with sin, epithumia, and the Apostle Paul says angels can't take their eye. It's like angel internet porn, where God takes the worst story imaginable and makes it the greatest glory possible. And so that's angel porn. They watch it and it just keeps blowing their minds. And whenever in any moment this story reveals itself to me and I catch just a glimpse of it, to me maybe that's a drug, baby, and I am hooked, and I'm going to do that drug until the day I die. Maybe I'm a junkie. So I don't know. The problem is, you get a preacher in front of someone and you pull a string and he starts preaching at you, so forgive me.
Well, it's interesting the language you used at the end there, like, are you addicted to this stuff? And I think that's an example of how there's no clean room, because even if the religion is more than just a pragmatic survival mechanism, then, well, if it's a pragmatic survival mechanism, and you can see evidence of that by the fact that you're addicted to it, but does that mean that that's all it is? Is that all it is? Well, I think one of the things, obviously just listening, there's lots of thoughts that come up. And I wonder, for folks who are not engaged in religion and who are on the atheist side of things and who kind of reject religion, but are interested in that conversation, I kind of wonder what's the way in for those people, because it seems like to me that people can either have some kind of transcendent experience, either through drugs or through who knows what. They could just be walking through the city and have like all of a sudden their perspective shifts for just a few seconds. And that makes them curious about actually what's going on here. Or someone, let's say, goes to church and they just keep going for like a few weeks and they don't even know what's going on, but they just keep going because they're curious. And so like what comes first, like the mystical experience or the religious container that allows you to hold that experience and kind of grow it, like a plant. It's like the fertile soil that you can plant that experience in. And I kind of think that when I hear you talking about your story, you could answer this question, or it could just be rhetorical. It's like, what comes first, the experience of God, or is it becoming part of the Christian tradition that prepares the ground for God to show up in your life? And so it's like, it's a story. It's just a story, a pragmatic evolutionary strategy to get along in life until you believe it. And then it's not just a pragmatic story anymore, right? So, and I think that, and from that point on, it's like a huge shift in everything. And I'm sure you could say like, oh yeah, on one level it is just a story, but I've been living, I'm speaking for myself, I've been living with this story for a few years, and now it's more than just a story. It's actually like, I don't know what you could call it. It's like an embodied experience. It's a way of life. It's not just a pragmatic solution to the pain and suffering of the world. Like those are the terms that we speak in so that we can understand each other. But I think that there's something it would be really useful for atheists and for people who are curious about religion but not ready to engage, to give people suggestions or steps on how they can start this process, because it is just kind of dry matter that doesn't really provide much nourishment until somehow it does, and who knows how.
See, so this, I declare myself a Calvinist, which is a good thing, because if I declared myself not, my denomination would kick me out. But the Calvinists answer this by, it's in a sense cheating. Well, they get it from the New Testament, which is God does it. Well, okay. Well, what does that mean? And then we're lost in the morass of our agency or God's agency. But what's really interesting to me about Peterson is I had never put this together until I'd listened to him. What Peterson is really asserting is that through human beings, the story verse enters the Darwinian story of biological succession, and it does it through the hierarchy, because we create these hierarchies over all kinds of values. And so now it's, so I go to a Christian, many people have commented to me that my wife is outrageously more beautiful than I am. So how did you marry up? Well, I probably married up because I leveraged certain skills that I am using now of articulation, and we met at a Christian college. She was a Christian. So, I leveraged these skills in order to marry a woman better looking than I am. And so my children are better looking than I am. And well, so here you have a hierarchy, and you have values on this hierarchy. And see, I can't even tell this story without doing Peterson hand things. Oh, what things we are as people. So Rebel Wisdom, that's right. Rebel Wisdom is filming here on Sunday. And of course, nobody in my church watches Jordan Peterson. They hardly know who the man is. And I'm working through hierarchies, and I'm doing all these hand things. I'm thinking, these Rebel Wisdom people are going to say, this guy's just ripping Peterson off. And I say, yeah, I am.
You've been colonized.
Liars were thieves. So there's this hierarchy. And then the story verse gets into the biosphere via mate selection. And this has been going on for, you know, depending on your perspective, thousands or millions of years. And you begin to say, and then again, the thing that's really fascinating me now, and it always boils down to the resurrection of Jesus, because the most real thing must be true at the most levels as possible. So you've got three dimensions, you got the fourth dimension, time, and then we have the transcendent, we have relational levels, we got all these levels. And so, you know, the idea is that if Jesus, you know, if Thomas could really touch Jesus' hand, what does that mean? And that's what, I mean, it's been blowing people's minds for 2,000 years, because okay, so yeah, after I'm gone, you'll remember me. There'll be YouTubes around. We still talk about Augustine. The Greeks had this idea of what it, in a sense, to be within Greek culture, ancient Greek culture, to be saved meant we would still remember Achilles and Hector and Homer. And so they all, Agamemnon, they all made it because they're still alive in our minds. But what of them is still alive in our minds? I mean, they've just become ghosts. Mm. And so the most real thing is, well, you and I have a relationship via this internet thing. It would be more real for you and I to meet face to face and to shake hands and embrace. And now suddenly we would, our mental minions, we would record smells. We would, you know, we would have context. I would meet your wife and your child, and you would meet some of my family, and we would sit down and we get, so the more real, the more dimensions it's actualized in. And so the center of this entire, the center of reality must be the absolute most real at the absolute number of levels. And if that's the center, could it be that we are being pulled gravitationally into this center, but at all of our levels? So, right. And that's the best I can do in terms of, someone says, well, what is real? Well, let's list how many levels of reality there are. Let's grade those realities in terms of what is more real and less real. And if we can do that, we begin to, in an abstract way, say that which is most real. Okay? And, well, that is God. And reality goes out from there. And so, I don't know if that's, see, I keep losing the thread. See, this is why I do PowerPoint, is because I just keep getting lost.
I'm the same. I was just trying to think about how to talk about what you were talking about in very practical kind of like individual experience kind of ways. And I could imagine if I was someone who came to ask you that question, like, oh, what's really real? And, you know, you were to give me a description of what you just told me, I don't think it would actually mean anything to me in my life until the bottom fell out of my life in some way. It's like, you could tell me that this table, that's the most real thing. This material world that you experience, that's the most real thing. But then let's say 10 years down the road, I've taken that and I've actually made it real in my life, and I've built my whole life around this idea of what's true. And then something happens, like I get sick out of nowhere, and all of a sudden this truth, the material world that I put all my faith in, is just blown apart. Now I'm ready to actually hear what you have to say, because up until that point it was like I was still inside a story. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I am so committed to this methodology of sort of mindfulness as a way to constantly renew the humility that's required to say, I don't actually know what's going on. Like, I don't actually know what's true, because then you can be available to hear what is coming in, as opposed to, having your blinders on. And I guess one of the questions I've been asking is, yeah, I'm not ready to talk about that yet because I haven't spent enough time thinking about it or living it really. But yeah, there's something about like living our lives, and there's something about talking about things in an intellectual manner that's helpful, but it's also just, it's kind of like it's like pretend, or it's like an entertainment, you know?
Yeah.
And it's frustrating that in some ways you want to help people see where their blind spots are, but they can't see them until they see them.
Yeah. And so, you know, and what you said about, you know, talking about things, and so what's more real than talking about things? Well, it's living them out.
Mm-hmm.
Living them out is more real than talking about them. Well, we can talk about things we can't live out. Yeah. Is that a bad thing? Well, I'm glad we can at least talk about them, because we can experience them on one level, even if we can't live them out. But if we can actually live them out in action, because living things out in this real world is more real than just talking or thinking.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That gets
Just
back
like
into the multiple layers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the question of, well, how, when and why does the light come on? I don't think we're in charge of that.
No.
We're just not in charge of this.
And I think the best we can do, I think, is create the conditions so that when that situation arises for somebody, that your church and you are ready to hold them, right, and hold that experience in a way that can help it flourish, right, rather than just someone has some kind of experience, some kind of transcendent experience, and then it just fades into memory because our culture has no way of holding that experience.
Yeah. Well, and also, okay, so the bottom falls out in someone's life, and if you assume that the level of action is, the more levels that this is at, the realer it is. So maybe it means bringing them a meatloaf because that's the best you can do. And,
right.
and in a sense, and that as a pastor, you see that often because pastors still within our culture, you know, well, maybe you'll call a therapist, but maybe you don't have insurance, and the therapist is going to see you for 1 hour, you know, every week or every month in this little room, and that a pastor is available at more levels. So you find a pastor, and now as a pastor, things happen in people's lives that are just way beyond me. You know, someone's dog dies, okay, even that is beyond me. I can pray with them, and so there are practices that I pass on in my tradition. But many will tell you so often, there's a tragedy, you sit with them. That's all you do. Sometimes you can talk. Most of the time you can't. That's where you get down to your chatty brain. Your chatty brain, their pain makes me feel uncomfortable, and so I'm going to talk, but what I'm really doing is trying to soothe my own pain. So I'm really being selfish. So what I really need to do is sit there with them in the middle of their pain and just be with them in their pain, because we don't have anything better. And so as a pastor, that's often what you do. And is it insufficient? Yes. Have you been able to make their pain go away? No. But at least they're not alone. And then again, right there, we have this sense of, so on one hand, there's the clean room of myself, but in another way, being alone is, with pain, you don't want to be alone in your pain. You know, why is that with us? Pain shared is pain divided. Joy shared is joy multiplied. Oh gosh, we don't know anything. We really don't.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, this is I think one of the things that helped me so much was going on a retreat. And one of the things that was highlighted was that you don't need to know how something works for it to work. Like, I don't have to know how I don't have to know how I'm getting you on my screen and you're getting me on your screen for us to still have a conversation. And I think that part of the modern disease or the modern malaise is this like need to know everything, like as if knowing how something works somehow gives you control or agency over it so that your life is better, so that your life's less scary, and that you can actually achieve what you desire, and that you'll reach the ends that you seek. But I think in some ways that's like a huge pitfall, because some of the most important things for us as human beings seem to be unknowable, but they don't require us to know for them to have meaning and for them to work.
Yes.
It's like we can't understand them necessarily in this like intellectual, like A plus B equals C kind of way, but we can understand them at the level of our lived experience. And when we go searching for how they work, we end up missing the experience. And so it's like a double negative, because you don't find out how it works, and you miss the experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's just like this clinging, this need to know, is sort of blinds us from actually truly knowing things. Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. And I think that, so if we ask the question, well, why do I feel the need to know? I suspect my motivation is, if I can know it, then I can control it, then I can use it, then I can wield it to the outcome I desire,
Mm-hmm.
which is the heart of technology. It's the heart of our civilization. It's I think the heart of the scientific project. But that brings us all the way back to where we started the conversation, where you said, I don't even know what I want.
Even if I want something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually good for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're at this point now in our civilization where we have tremendous power as individuals. These tools that we have, computers and knowledge and cars and planes and money that translates all of this stuff. And at the scale we have it, there are billions of people who have very little power, but there are billions of people that have the kind of power that all but just a tiny sliver of people have had in human history. And we haven't killed ourselves and each other yet. That's a huge thing.
Right.
But
yeah.
So here we are, we've got all this power. And then I almost think, well, we're like the last pagan generation or the first Christian generation of the Roman Empire. We've got all this power, and we say, I'm going to go off into the desert and jump on grasshoppers and meditate for the rest of my life. I'm certainly not going to have sex. Because, Augustine was, Augustine, in terms of the Western church, there's no one bigger than Augustine after the apostolic period. But Augustine, he had a common law marriage, a child out of wedlock. He was a womanizer, and he turns his back on all of that. And well, there's the question about suffering and glory. Is it a greater thing to have, been Newton, who probably never touched a woman, or Augustine, who knew the pleasures and then moved on from it? So it's amazing.
Yeah. But just, I feel like the conversation is wrapping up, but one thing that I just wanted to go over again was the Buddhist story is the story of someone who kind of has it all and then gives it all up, right? And becomes an ascetic and almost dies, right. But then says, actually, neither of these extremes are the right path. The right path is the middle way, like neither just indulgence nor total rejection of, your body and your relationships and stuff. It's somewhere in the middle, which isn't as appealing as a story, I think. Like you said, who wants to go watch a movie about the middle way? It's like, it doesn't sound like fun. But I think for most people, that's the way we actually would like our lives to be. Like we would actually, we would trade. Like how many people actually want to be the genius tortured artist? We might fantasize about it, But the minute we experience suffering in any kind of prolonged way, we're like, whoa, I'm off this ride. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a, what was it? I think it was Mouthy Buddha. I've been watching some of his videos lately. He's got some interesting videos. He did a thing on Justin Bieber. And you see this kid, you know, his mom's really happy. Oh, my boy's going to be a star. As a parent, I'm thinking, you idiot. You know, it's the last thing I would want for my kids. And so you see him, you know, wealth, fame, power, glory, and suffering. And so there's this, you know, is it the case that this world, this universe, this existence that we live in, that there's always a relationship between suffering and glory? That, I mean, we see it in artists, you know, the artist who just kind of sits down and does something cool. No, it's the tortured artist. I learned that early on. I noticed that the people with the best sense of humor have the worst childhoods. And you say, how could they get so darn funny? Well, because they suffered. Right. Because humor comes out of suffering. Because suffering comes out of, you know, there's Peterson's point about suffering. I think there's a lot right to it, in that there's something about suffering which is way down deep at our core. And then the question is, okay, how every story has suffering in its middle. If you don't have suffering or challenge in the story, you don't have a story. And then the real story is, how is that challenge turned to glory? There's something
one of the most like, for me personally, one of the most powerful questions that I kind of asked myself was, how can I have everything that makes a good life but still not have a good life? Like, how can I have all the things of a good life but not be living a good life? It just didn't make sense. And it wasn't until I was able to accept that I am not happy. Like, until I was able to actually say and really admit to myself, this isn't working. I'm not happy. I am suffering. That was when I actually started to take responsibility for my life. And I hear that message. It's like almost like when we encounter suffering, that's kind of where we first touch reality. Like that's our first encounter with what's real.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I can't say that I've actually suffered that much in my life compared to others. So, you know, other people are be more qualified maybe to talk about it, but that just if you're searching for reality, I feel like just look in your life where you're not looking, because that's where you're going to find it. And this is all stuff that Peterson says over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But it's so hard. Like, you know, there's a reason why people don't, I think people don't seem to stop drinking or stop doing drugs until they hit rock bottom like 3 times or something. No one saying that there's something wrong with what I'm doing, or that I'm wrong, or that things aren't working, that turns out to be really, really difficult. Yeah.
There's I heard a great saying from another pastor who got it from someone else. He said, basically, you can't save your face and your ass at the same time. That sounds like that came out of an AA meeting somewhere. Well, let's pause the recording and wrap things up. But this was I'll pause the recording and we'll decide what we want to do with it.
Sure.